from Tennessee and recognize the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank Chairman Shimkus as well for continuing to bring light to the broken promise the federal government made to our communities. The state of Minnesota is home to 3 nuclear reactors, 2 of which are at the Prairie Island nuclear plant in my district. Located directly adjacent to the Prairie Island Indian Reservation and the city of Red Wing, the plant has stored spent nuclear fuel on site since the 1970s. While this is done in a very safe and highly secure manner, storage in close proximity to large communities is simply not appropriate. In 1982, Congress agreed and made it clear they wanted the federal government to oversee and manage the storage of spent fuel. Congress did not want to put the burden and oversight of maintaining safe nuclear storage on our local communities. The Nuclear Waste Policy Act was adopted, and the federal government was tasked with creating a national federal repository for used fuel. The federal government began collecting taxes on all users of nuclear power. In the end, my constituents, businesses, and Americans throughout the country have paid roughly $40 billion in taxes and interest. In 1995, due to the inaction at the federal level, the plant in my district was forced to take matters into their own hands. While they continued to help fund a repository, they also invested in and began operating a dry cask storage area, a pad on site that could hold up to 48 casks of fuel. Now that should have been enough, more than enough, to cover their needs until the federal government finished their job. Today, Prairie Island is home to 40 casks, with 7 more expected to be filled by 2020. 36 years after the passage of the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, we still have no repository. Prairie Island now has to go through the process of planning to expand their dry cask facilities in order to accommodate fuel they paid the federal government to dispose of. So I strongly support the efforts of Chairman Shimkus, and that is why I co-sponsored the Nuclear Waste Policy Amendments Act of 2017. We owe it to our communities to follow through on our promise to provide a safe place for storage. Meanwhile, it isn't just our local communities that are impacted by this inaction. When Congress passed a budget last year, I worked to point out that the federal government had assumed major liabilities associated with its failure to provide safe and environmentally friendly storage. The GAO recently reported that the federal government's environmental liability alone is nearly $450 billion and growing. At the same time, the funds collected from taxpayers to open a repository have begun being diverted to other payout settlements and judgments based on our broken promise. By the end of fiscal year 2016, $6.1 billion had been paid out, with the Department of Energy estimating another $25 billion to follow. It is time to keep our promise. Our communities expect it, and the federal government cannot afford not to do so. So I strongly urge the passage of the Nuclear Waste Policy Amendments Act, and with that, I yield.